Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to, this is the second to last talk in our Q1 Oceanside chat speaker series. Stay tuned for more information on the one that will come after this. But today we are welcoming Faye Almeshaan, a very good old friend from VSG. She has done so much to support our teams at the garage, from doing a speaker series way back when she was managing operations over at Acela Prize. She's also helped teams, with office hours, applications, things like that. She came and joined us for some VC Angel office hours, gave some feedback to our teams on their decks. And I, couldn't be more happy to have her back today to give a talk about the motivated entrepreneur. Faye actually has gone off and started her own consulting company, and she now supports teams in all the same ways that she has in the past through strategic advising, but also with her, keen understanding on how investment works. I'll let her give a little bit more color to her bio, but Faye, I just have to say, it's just been such a pleasure to interact with you over these years. For me personally, as a woman in operations, it's really, really inspiring to see somebody like you do so well in the startup space. So thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to your talk.
Oh, thanks. Nicest bio ever. Thank you so much, Esther. I really appreciate it. And I love working with you guys. And I really love supporting entrepreneurs. So a little bit on me. I have about 12 years of experience in every aspect of the startup ecosystem. I started out as an early employee for some venture-backed companies, sort of like that employee number one role, where I'm a generalist and helping startups with whatever they need. I've started my own companies, and I have also worked on the venture capital side. So like Arcelia said, I've been here for investing office hours. I invested in a lot of companies like Fireflies, the note taker that's on here right now. I'm still a venture partner for Forum Ventures. We're a B2B SaaS venture fund. We invest super early stage, so everything from pre-seed, seed, sometimes Series A, and we've also launched our own studio. So we create companies in-house as well. And like Arcelia mentioned, I have actually started my own consulting agency. So named after myself. So it's Faye Almeshaan Consulting, and I am an executive coach and strategic consultant, and I help early stage startups basically lay the foundations for scaling. So everything from strategic planning, implementing OKRs, building a culture of accountability, and helping those companies grow their teams to double or triple their size year over year. So with that said, I will start sharing. Do you guys see this?
I see it. It looks great.
Okay, awesome. So I'm very casual, very chill. So if you guys have any questions, you can jump right in and just ask as we're going, but I'll get through the presentation. So, there we go. I always start with a quote. I know this is like very old school, very cheesy, but I love quotes and I get inspired by them all the time. And so one of the things I really wanted to bring up, given the fact that we're talking about motivation today, is Henry Ford's famous quote, "Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right." I think this is like one of the most, this is the thing that's really gotten me through a lot in life. And the reason for it is because it's true. If you are your word, you are your own mental block. And mindset is so important in entrepreneurship because you're by yourself, you're trudging along, you're getting all this stuff done. A lot of times you're solopreneurs. If you have a co-founder, good for you, that's amazing. But for the most part, you start alone, coming up with an idea and trying to build something. And it's a very scary path, and your mindset is going to get through a lot. And so I talk a lot about positivity as well. But at the end of the day, if you're lacking confidence in yourself, it'll stop you from ever trying. And so I think it's important to just have that positive mindset. So let's get right into it. This talk is all about the self-motivated entrepreneur. You guys know it's a lonely road. It's really tough to have motivation day in and day out. So let's start by defining motivation. Motivation is the desire, willingness, or reason one has for behaving a certain way. I know a lot of times when we talk about motivation, it's very grand, right? It's like, oh, I was motivated to start this company, but every single decision you make has a motivation behind it. And so that's important to understand, because motivation isn't just a long-term thing, it's day in and day out. It's like, how do I get the motivation to like get up this morning? How do I get the motivation to execute on my tasks for the day? And so one of the main, so an important thing to know about motivation is there's actually two main types of motivations. There's intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And so one is not better than the other. I'm sure you guys have possibly heard about these types of motivations. A lot of times people talk about intrinsic being the positive one and extrinsic being negative because it's external factors, but that's not really how I think of it. I think you actually need both to be very successful. And I'll dive deeper into this after we go over both of them. So intrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from within, right? This is based on who you are as a person, your values, what you care about. And so a lot of times intrinsic motivation is what's going to get you to cross that finish line of a marathon. It's that long-term motivation that you need to get started and finish something. And there's 4 common types of intrinsic motivation. These aren't this isn't a comprehensive list, but this is what I find most entrepreneurs deal with. So number 1 is the biggest one. It's purpose. I feel like people, if you're always looking for their purpose, they're always looking for the meaning behind everything. Purpose is a really, really, really strong motivator for you to do something. It's mostly the feeling of doing something for somebody else. So think about this as a single mom with 2 jobs feeding her kids, right? It's tough. It's tough to have those jobs because it's for her kids. Like there is that purpose, that motivation behind it that keeps her going. This is also a really big one is like activists, right? A lot of times activists are going out there protesting, risking their lives, their safety, their livelihood to protest for something that they believe in. And it's because it's for a greater cause. It's not just about themselves, it's about other people. If you ever meet entrepreneurs, in impact spaces, most entrepreneurs usually will have like a really strong purpose, right? They want to change the world for a greater cause, bigger purpose. Second is achievement. That's the feeling of accomplishment and pride you get when you do something big. This, you can imagine, is also really big with entrepreneurs. Obviously, you guys are all go-getters. You want to check stuff off your to-do list. There is that sense of accomplishment and purpose that you get from achieving something. Next is learning and competency. Given this is a university, I'm sure a lot of you guys being associated with university feel the need to continuously be learning and improving yourself and improve your skill sets and your competencies. And there's a level of motivation that comes from that, right? I'm sure that's what a lot of people have when they do their PhDs, is really long degrees that you need a lot of motivation for. And finally, I like to mention creativity. A lot of people feel motivation from just allowing themselves to be creative. You see that a lot in art. You see a lot in art, but also entrepreneurship in the sense of like creative thinking and engineering. So that is intrinsic motivation in a few of the common types. Next, we'll define extrinsic motivation. This is driven by external drive factors. So this can drive urgency, but won't last long term. So again, I'm saying that they work really well together because you want to have those long-term goals and you want to have that purpose that's, you're going to put up on your wall and it's going to guide you throughout your life, but you also need the spurts of motivation to get you through the day, right? Common types of these are like incentives and rewards. Incentives, for example, maybe it's a bonus at the end of the year, right? That's how companies motivate a lot of their employees. Hey, accomplish your objectives for this year and you get a nice little cash bonus at the end of the year. On a personal level, it could also be, when somebody's done really well on their diet and exercise for the week, and then on the Sunday, they get a treat, right? They get a Kit Kat, a little Sunday or whatever. So incentives and rewards are really, really good for short term, and it's a great way for you to push yourself to get things done in that short period. Second is fear. This is a negative reinforcer. And so a good example is if someone thinks they'll get fired, right? A lot of companies utilize this. Some people overutilize it, and that's when you have a really negative culture, but it still can be used in a positive way. Second is power and influence. This is the power and influence you have over others. Some people want to have others follow them or make their vision come true. And then finally, we have social. Social is, it's really the want to fit in socially. So you may be motivated to dress better, to impress other people. So 2 types of motivations. Again, I don't necessarily think one is positive and one is negative. I think you can use both to really, really get yourself excited. So given that you guys are all entrepreneurs, you guys are all coming up with your businesses, I want to do a quick exercise. I want to spend like 5 minutes. I'm going to time it. I have my phone here. And what I want you guys to do is write out your motivations for being an entrepreneur. And I want you to write it out in detail. So For example, I'm purpose motivated because my app helps people get out of debt. Ooh. Can you guys still see my
Yep,
screen?
you got it back up.
Okay.
If you
Please
guys
Google.
are comfortable, it would be really interesting to see some of these answers in the chat if you guys wanted to drop them in there, especially because I'll be able to share the chat later. And sometimes it's nice for others to learn from you if you have something really interesting. And really quickly, Faye, I wanted to say it's so great that you broke these two motivators down because, you know, we support a lot of faculty founders. And, you know, I feel like research-driven entrepreneurs are some of the hardest ones to kind of get the fire underneath them. And I'm realizing it isn't for lack of motivation. They are actually achieving a lot of the intrinsic motivation common types through their like academic pursuits. And then they also are getting a lot of the extrinsic motivation from their position as faculty. And that's where the issue is, that I feel like there's not enough business extrinsic motivation. So they're kind of very satisfied and very motivated, but they're not very driven, right? That motivation doesn't get to translate and really accelerate their business. They're sometimes the hardest founders to like get going. And I'm just looking at all these things and like, I can literally check off the box for all of these, for some of these faculty founders I know. And it's like, oh, I get it. Like, it isn't that they're lacking motivation. They're lacking a very specific type of extrinsic motivation, which is like the business.
Yeah,
You know?
I think that's so interesting. Or maybe like their intrinsic motivation is really learning. And so for them, it's doing that research and like absorbing that knowledge, but not necessarily starting a business. And actually, we'll get into that next, which is like, is this the right motivation to run this company, right? Like, will you actually use this in the right way? Is this the right thing for you to be doing? Maybe not, and that's okay. But understanding your motivation and where it sits between the two is really important. So
it's such a great exercise.
Yeah, so I'll start 5 minutes now. What you guys can do, if you're struggling at all, is go through the two lists, the intrinsic and extrinsic, and pull out the ones that mean a lot to you, and then try to create sentences out of each of them. So, for example, if it's achievement, you know, I love the feeling of achievement, and so I want to succeed in this company. Or I like being creative, and so I started a design agency. Whatever that is, just spend a few minutes and just write them out. It won't be perfect. Don't worry about that. Just like whatever comes to mind first. And I'll start the time now.
While you guys are thinking and writing, I usually mention this. I don't know why I forgot. Once we're done with this exercise, which I think is such a good exercise to do, also consider adding things like your LinkedIn bio, your business URL, any needs that you guys are having as founders. If you're a student and you're looking for work, and you have a specific skill that's useful for tech startups, really the chat is such a great way for us to network in these kind of Zoom environments. You don't get that benefit of like, you know, the, hey, who are you? Because you're sitting right next to me. So please utilize the chat for that. And it, you know, you don't have to feverishly capture that data now because you'll get the chat after the recording.
Can I play deep focus music? Can you guys hear that?
I don't hear it, but usually you have to toggle that button before you do the share screen. Did you do like share your, if you like
share sound, yeah.
I don't know if you can do it now after.
That's okay.
Well, while they're working, Faye, what would you say out of both lists is the most challenging of the common types that you experience in your work with founders?
I wouldn't say any of them are challenging. I would say it's just a matter of finding the right motivation for what you're doing. Like if all of your motivations are extrinsic, it's probably not going to work long term, right? You can motivate yourself to like do the homework that's due this week or finish an exam maybe, but you're not going to get through a 4-year degree if you don't have any like intrinsic motivation pushing you forward, right? Or
Sure.
it'll be an uphill climb for sure. And so same thing with founders is a lot of times like founders, especially founders that wanted to be founders before they thought of the idea, they tend to like look for an idea and then they're like, oh, look, there's white space in the market. But then they realize they have no passion. And so not having anything related to it, like it's going to be really, really tough, just for example, like if you only had power and influence as a motivator, like you wanted to be a big time founder, you wanted the fame and the glory, like if that's the only reason and you're not connected to the mission of the company, I'm sure it can work maybe, but it's an uphill climb. And honestly, in my opinion, it's not worth it, right? You want to love what you do. You want to go in and day out feeling amazing about it.
Yeah. The extrinsic motivators seem like they could cause a lot of burnout too.
Yeah, for sure. That's why they're short term. They drive urgency, right? It's like, okay, let's get this done right now. If I finish my 3 tasks, I can take a break, right? Those are the little things that you do, like the Pomodoro technique or whatever, getting you like through the day. Like, can you imagine day in and day out just trying to get through the day? It's tough. Also, interestingly, I feel like I've seen a lot of founders reflect more on this after COVID. I feel like a lot of us were running like full speed ahead, like day in, day out, what do I need to do? And then COVID like pumped the brakes. And now a lot of people are a lot more reflective about their purpose and their mission and what really motivates them. Okay, we have 1 minute left. So if you have final thoughts, jot those down. Again, it's okay if it's not perfect. You guys can take this away and do it on your own later.
Shout out to Yosef for adding his motivation into the meeting chat.
Oh, that's awesome, Yusuf. That's really cool.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that, Francis. That's really cool. That's really cool motivation. Like, oh, affordable. Yeah, I love it. This is so cool, guys. Thanks for sharing. And that was a great idea, Arcelia. If you can share that with me after too, I'd love to have the chat. Cool. Awesome. So that was our time. I hope you guys got some good stuff written down. I think it's really important to reflect on motivation, not just once, but also do regular check-ins with yourself. Like see what's changed, right? As humans, we're always evolving and we're always changing. And one motivation isn't going to last your entire life, right? Everything changes. Think about, the easiest example is like people that become parents, right? Their motivations shift overnight because all of a sudden there's somebody else depending on them. And sometimes that changes what they want out of their business or what they want out of their career. And so keep checking in with yourselves. I would say try to do it like quarterly, semi-annually, and see what other factors are motivating you and how you can leverage that to make sure you're pushing yourself day in and day out. Okay, so we just did the exercise. Congrats. That was 5 minutes and you got a lot done. These motivations will guide you through your entrepreneurial journey. Again, you're going to check in with yourself and you're going to see if they still matter. But the cool thing about what you just did is you have a list that will continuously motivate you. Anytime you're feeling down, anytime you feel like you don't know why you're doing this, just look back at that list and you'll have a list of motivations for why you should keep moving forward. This list will also be able to motivate your team. I know this is about solopreneurs and getting through this by yourself, but when you do have a team, you can show them that list and say, this is what we're trying to do, right? The stuff that you guys wrote in the chat, share that with not just your employees, but your clients, your partners, your investors, all of these people that are in your world and your ecosystem that want to support you, the garage, right? Get everybody on board with what you're trying to do and what motivates you. That's the best way to get people excited about what you're doing, because people love a story. They love connecting with other humans, and this is at the deepest level. This also gets you to focus on the big picture. This is a little bit what I was talking about earlier, where sometimes folks don't align their motivations to what they're doing. So spend some time, reviewing it and saying, hey, is this the right type of business for my passion? Or am I really motivated about this type of business? Maybe I'm actually really motivated about healthcare or whatever, and that's what I want to be doing. This also long-term can be used to create your mission, vision, values. It can reinforce your brand. You are the person that sets the vision for your company. And so this is really the list that is going to create a lot of that work. And so that is really, really cool. And again, it's not final, but this is a really, really good start. And probably the first time you sat down and thought about your actual motivations for doing something, right? And so as you continue your journey, you'll learn more about what drives you and maybe even change over time. But once you feel good about them, honestly, I would recommend printing them out and having them somewhere next to you, kind of like an affirmation or a positive daily reminder of like what you're doing this for. Okay, so I'm glad we got the exercise out of the way. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and I want to talk about accountability. We know what motivates you and we are going to check in on that daily, right? So how do we hold ourselves accountable when we're not the boss? This is like a really big question. So accountability goes back to mindset. A lot of us, when we go to school, we're a student, we get what is that called? You get a syllabus. You get a syllabus at the beginning, right? And it tells you exactly what you have to do to get A+. I love that. I was a really good student, followed the syllabus, always got good grades. And it kind of trained me to always have a framework without creating my own. Same thing with your first job, right? You join, you have a manager, they give you a plan, they give you your job description, they tell you exactly what you have to do to be successful. The problem with entrepreneurship is nobody does that for you. And honestly, nobody really teaches you how to do that. And so we're in this position where we're in a brand new environment where there is no accountability, there's no structure, and we're completely unused to it. And so the way that you build accountability systems for yourself is you go back to a time where you were very accountable. So if you were a good student, think about why you were a good student. If you were a good employee, why you were successful in that environment. And we're going to recreate that environment. And so you're going to build that structure for yourself. So, one of the ways that you can do this is really setting a grand vision, right? This is why companies have visions. Think about, I don't know, like what's Amazon's vision, I think, is to be like the one-click shop for the world or something like that. So your vision is something that's really grand. You guys actually wrote a few of your visions in the chats. I've noticed a lot of you guys automatically go to that. And I think that's because we look at company visions and we recognize that. So set that long plan and then go and break it down. So, okay, if I want to change the aesthetic market so that it's safer in 10 years, right? What does that actually mean year in and year out? What do I need to do this year to set myself up for success? And after you break it down to this year, go further and break it down to quarters, months, and weeks. Just like personal goal setting, if you guys have ever done like a personal goal setting exercise, that's something very similar. You create a long-term vision and then you break it down into these smaller goals. So you're gonna review the weekly goals to see if it's realistic. So after you've done all of this, check the weekly goal and say, okay, so for example, I want to get to $1 million, right? But let's say that means having 50 conversations a day. So I know that that's not realistic. So I need to update my goals. So now let's say I bring it down and I say, okay, I need $100,000 this year to be successful. And each client pays 1,000, so you need 100 clients, right? And so you do the math backwards to figure out if that weekly goal is realistic. If your week is expected to if you're expected to call 1,000 people per week, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to happen, right? And so make it realistic for what your yearly goal is. After you do that and you know that your weekly goals are realistic, schedule a weekly check-in with yourself. You guys remember first job, your manager checking with you weekly. They're like, what'd you do this week? And you have to tell them what you did. And then you got to tell them your goals and everything like that. Do that with yourself. Be your own manager. Sit there and actually have a list of things to go over. So go over your weekly goals. Did you hit them? If you didn't hit them, why not? What happened? Is it because of something you did, or is it because the system needs to change, right? Like it was too aggressive, or there were things you didn't account for. The best way that I can put it is just being your own manager and holding yourself accountable. And so there's nowhere to run. And making this meeting mandatory. I think one of the biggest things I see, especially with my clients, is that they cancel these meetings. They're like, oh, it's a meeting with myself. Why should I keep it? And so make sure that it's one of those meetings that never gets moved. Don't even change the time. Like if a client wants it at that time, no, find another time. This is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. A few tips. If you're consistently not hitting your goals, you can change them quarterly or monthly, but no more than that. And the reason I say that for all my clients, I don't let them change their goals until the end of the quarter. So actually that's coming up right now. I'm evaluating with all my clients, like, what do we think about these goals? Did they actually make sense? Were they realistic? Are you hitting them? If not, is it because you're doing something wrong, or is it because the goals were too ambitious? And then we iterate from there. You want to constantly be iterating to make sure that you're moving at the speed of your business. Next tip, do not miss a check-in with yourself. I'm going to keep emphasizing this. Do not miss it. I know this is like a very, this is very similar to like trainers, right? Where they tell you, don't miss a workout. And you're like, oh, no, it's no big deal. But it really is about prioritizing yourself and prioritizing your company. And this is one of those things that's going to hold you accountable over anything else. And then lastly, leverage short-term extrinsic motivators to help. Example is like rewarding yourself for hitting weekly, monthly goals, right? We see that a lot with like positions that are very, very difficult. So for example, if anyone here has ever been a salesperson, you know that in sales, you need to hit your quota, right? And sometimes they have them even broken down to weekly, but like the monthly quota, like how you get your commission. So obviously the financial motivator should be enough, but even that isn't enough sometimes. So a lot of times sales leaders will go to their sales team and they'll be like, $100 Amazon gift card for the person that does 50 calls today, because they're trying to motivate them to do calls and get like friendly competition going. And so do that same thing with you. I know it sounds funny to do it for yourself, but think of it just like, the example we used earlier, like giving yourself a Kit Kat after being good on your diet all week. So think about what gets you excited. If it means having a beer Friday at 4 p.m. to celebrate a really, really good week, then that's what you do, right? I'm not encouraging beer drinking. But if that's what you want, that's what you do. And so find out what really gets you going. And again, combine the long-term and the short-term, the intrinsic and extrinsic short-term and long-term goals, so that you find the perfect motivation for you to keep yourself accountable. So wrapping up the accountability framework, just so that you guys have something like concrete on one slide that you can refer back to. The number one thing is figuring out what motivates you extrinsically and intrinsically. We kind of already did that today, but quite frankly, 5 minutes isn't enough time. So really spend some time reflecting and thinking about what gets you going, what gets you excited. Second is set a grand vision that you can refer to often. So, this is a lot of companies, like they put their vision on the wall, right? So that when you walk into the company, that's the first thing that you see. There's a reason so many companies do that. And it's because they want every single person at that company to know what the goal is in 10 years. And so even though you're working by yourself, even though you're just one person, you probably already know that vision. There is something so powerful about the visualization and having the words in front of you, which is why I recommend printing it out and just seeing it day in and day out. Very much manifestation, if you believe in that stuff. Third is setting your goals. I know you guys probably hear this so much, but goal setting is like my favorite thing to do. It's like my hobby. I have too many goals. Don't do that. But really create your goals based on your vision, right? You know what motivates you. You know what your goal is for this company. So break down those goals. If I want to get here in 10 years, what do I need to do in 1 year? What do I need to do every quarter of that year, every month, and every week? Review those goals regularly. So make sure your goals are challenging and yet attainable, and make sure you're doing that weekly check-in. I will repeat, weekly check-in. Oh, that's funny. I keep saying the next thing that's on the framework. Yes, check-in. So weekly check-ins, and then obviously iterating. And so this is your whole framework. The stuff that is at the beginning, the motivation and vision, that stuff won't change too much, right? Motivation will change over time, but it's very, very long-term. Same with the vision, but your goals, reviewing them and check-ins, that you are getting all of that done. So that is really it. I'll keep open on the slide. I just realized there's a lot on the chat. Has anybody asked a question? I'm sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat.
We did have one like quasi question from Terry. Let me scooch back to it. he said, what's the one thing? Well, I mean, it was kind of, it's like, he was just adding to the discussion. What's the one thing that will keep you going when you are on the precipice of total failure? Which I guess is like, you know, how you determine what your motivators are, right? But I think it's a really well-stated question because, you know, especially for founders, I feel like on any given week, you could like be so down on everything that you've just experienced, like maybe you're fundraising and you've just like been exhausted by the lack of support, you know, and you doing your best. That I've just seen founders in this moment so often.
Oh my God, I remember. Yeah. I've worked with so many founders and it's obviously a roller coaster. Like that's the best way to describe this journey. How I feel about, you know, this is like a little bit of a side note, but it's interesting. This morning I was reading an article about how a lot of VCs are asking their founders to give their money back because the market is tough and they're like, you haven't found product market fit, so give me back my $10 million. And I just think a lot of it is so emotional and short-sighted. And so I think with a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to teach is to use frameworks and to use systems so that you take the emotion out of it. Although, you know, obviously motivation is very emotional because it's your values and what you care about. But I think it's important to take a step back and reflect without getting your emotions involved. And so to talk about failure, this is a really big one because I've seen a lot of companies shut down. I've seen a lot of companies deciding to shut down or deciding to pivot or deciding to do something different. And I think what's important is that you don't make any rash decisions. So in terms of failure, like if you've set out these goals are going to tell you if you're hitting product market fit, if you are, you know, finding the right type of company, if you're finding customers. Your customer discovery obviously tells you what your customers think about you. If you're doing all the right things to set your company up for success and it's still not working, I think it's a matter of you making a decision of, okay, if I don't find X by Y, then I will shut down the company. So a friend of mine just shut down his company because 6 months ago, so 6 months ago, he set out a goal for himself. At the end of the 6 months, he didn't hit that goal. So he said, okay, I have 2 more months to hit this goal. And if I don't, that day I shut down. And that day happened last Wednesday. And he was like, you know what? It's not an emotional decision. This is what I said. I didn't hit it. I gave myself some leeway. I gave myself 2 more months and decided to try a few different things. They did not work. So I decided to shut down.
And
oh, was someone adding something? Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's really it. Is a matter of creating goals for yourself. And if you don't hit those goals, it's the reflection and deciding, did I not hit these goals because something external happened? Was it because I didn't do something? Or is it because there's no product market fit and this isn't working? Were there any other questions? Oh, I love it. You guys are sharing all your intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. That's really cool. Yeah, is there anything else I can answer for anyone? And
There's
isn't pivot?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for sharing. It's really helpful. I'm a self-motivated entrepreneur. I've been working on my startup plan for years. I kind of disagree where it's one thing I'm going to ask right now is because you mentioned about the timeline. It's just like in a relationship, we give guys chances for timeline for myself. For my business, I mean, because I'm doing MBA, online MBA program at Marshall right now, graduating soon. But for me, the timing or the time we give to the baby, I mean, the startup is really matters to how much effort you want to put in. Sometimes we will go through failures and it's going to cost you lots of time and money. So in terms of that, I feel if someone really want to be successful with what they're doing, like focus on the passion eventually, they can, like you mentioned, give a milestone checkup, but they should not give up easy or like I don't hit this goal in the next 3 months, I'm gonna change or whatever. It makes sense in a way, but to me, because that happens to me a lot, it get delayed or it didn't hit the goal, but I still keep going. until I figured out how to solve that problem or I get resources. Because for a business, 99% of startup fail. Like my lawyers try to tell me, it's like, yeah, but I'm still gonna do it. Yeah, it's just something I sometimes find myself hesitating or having struggles over those things too.
Yeah, 100%. I actually agree with you. When I say, he gave himself 2 extra months, he wasn't just working on the business for 7 months. He had been working on it for 3 years. So there's a lot more that goes into it, but it's more about taking the emotion out of it. Now, I do know a lot of entrepreneurs, obviously, like you said, you called it your baby. A lot of entrepreneurs see their business as their baby, and they're not willing to give up on it in a short period of time. If you're willing to put all of your resources, all of your money, all of your time into something like that, then that's a decision that you make, but I don't think you make it short-sighted. So I don't think you should get to the day where you reach the end and you're like, you know what? I'm going to try for another 6 months, just out of the blue, right? There needs to be a reason for trying. And so that means, what's your new goal? What's your new path? What is it that you need to see to make you work on this longer? Is it a client? Is it doing more market research and recognizing that there is a need, or maybe there's a need for a pivot? Is it doing your customer discovery? So how many people have you talked to? If you talk to 2 people, that's probably not enough, right? Maybe you need to talk to, I don't know, if it's B2B, I would say like 50 people. If it's B2C, maybe 100, 200 people are collecting that data. And then what is it that you're learning from that, right? You have to still set those goals for yourselves, and you still have to make a decision. And I'm a huge proponent of taking the emotion out of it, but I know that's a controversial opinion because a lot of people feel like entrepreneurship is a very emotional roller coaster, and a lot of people focus on that. I think there was one other question, Francis. Isn't pivot just part of the development plan? Do you want to emphasize on the question, Francis?
Yeah, no, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hi. So I think I'd categorize that as I call it founder fog, where we get so involved in what we're trying to create. We're sure that it's going to work, and we need that for motivation. And we can even create spreadsheets that'll prove the point with math. The problem is, at some point when you actually get out there and try to sell it or make it work, it just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And so, and that, I think, is just having intellectual honesty with yourself and saying, look, this is a great idea. And there's a couple solutions. I'm going through this with another company that I have. It's a really high-end facial verification. I believe it'll happen. But in working through the tech's not there yet. I need the phones to capture a 3-dimensional image for me to process it through the algorithm. I just, at this point, I just put it to rest and I move on to something else. And I think that's difficult. So you do need to take the emotion out, I think, but it's just being honest, because what I don't want to do is work 4 or 5 years on something that's never going to work. It just isn't going to work for one reason or the other. And so I think that's the case. I've also been involved in the development of a lot of different things, medical devices, products for different things in biopharma, and things work or don't work for reasons. And if you're honest and you look for those, you can understand why they don't work. But pivot, to me, is almost inevitable. Whenever you're making anything, you're developing anything, you're going to try make certain assumptions. It doesn't work. And then if you're able to figure out how to pivot, sometimes most success comes from pivot. A lot of stuff that was developed never meant to be originally developed. Like, Lattice is a great thing. It grows eyelashes. That's not what it was invented for. It just, they pivoted when they saw how good it was, and they created a multi-billion-dollar product. So that's, I think, a nice way to say you don't have to give up, but do look for ways. If you're completely stuck, there's a reason you're stuck, and look for ways forward. And I know I get stuck all the time. So
yeah. No, I love that. I actually I think it was earlier this week, I was reading about Slack, and I didn't realize that Slack had a major pivot. Slack was actually a game. And then they pivoted to enterprise chat because of some of the research that they were doing. So I think for me, and again, this is very, very personal. Some people have completely different opinions. Entrepreneurship is very personal in general, right? These are people's babies. For me, I'm really big on the scientific method. So for me, it's what is your hypothesis? What are you trying to prove? And how are you going to prove that? Because you brought up a really good point. Entrepreneurs are really good at convincing other people and themselves. And I am a huge culprit of this. I will convince, I'm so convincing. I don't know how I haven't caught on to myself yet. We will use data, we'll use math. And I think that's why also like market research, a lot of entrepreneurs feel like their business is going to be successful based on market research, because that data can be skewed, or you can pull it from different sources, or you can get completely different answers, right? If you're just like, I read this thing once where it said, if you have a question, Google it in a positive connotation, a negative connotation, and you'll get completely opposite answers. So if you Google, is aspirin good for me? Or is aspirin bad for me? You'll get yes to both. And so whatever it is that you're already thinking, you're predisposed to thinking, you're gonna find the answer for it. And so it's a matter of using the scientific method when you actually go out there. My biggest thing, I love customer discovery. I think that's how you really understand what your customers are thinking. And two, I think it's important to be obsessed with the problem, not the solution. A lot of entrepreneurs are obsessed with their solution. They think, you know, let's say Slack, if they didn't pivot, right? They'd be like, no, we're creating this game, that's all we're gonna do, right? People that are obsessed with their solution tend to not be as successful, because if you're obsessed with the problem, you will shift with your customers. You'll understand their pain points and you'll build for those pain points. So again, I feel like I went on a big pivot there, big tangent there, but I think it's all about the scientific method and trying to take your emotion out of it, because you can be in love with your startup. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be successful. And also, how do you quantify success? A lot of times we talk about the venture-backed startups, and venture-backed startups, how do they define success? Fundraising, strictly. Like for a very, very, very long time, a lot of people were getting a lot of money, and they validated their success by saying some investor gave me money. I don't think that's great. And I think the market is shifting now, obviously. Hence the VCs asking for their money back. But I think one important question to ask yourself that goes back to motivation is, why are you even doing this, right? What type of company do you want? Do you want to change the world and make billions of dollars and be a deca unicorn and, you know, get funding from the biggest VCs? That's a very strict path, right? And you know that you have to triple in your first few years and then double every other year. Or do you want to start a business that can help hundreds of people and you're comfortable with it being bootstrapped, right? Deciding like what type of path you want is really important and ties back into your motivation of why you're doing something. So again, another tangent, but I hope that helped answer your question, Francis. Awesome. I see more notes. Every TCA successful company, all 250 except one pivoted. Oh, interesting. What is TCA, Terry?
It's Tech Coast Angels, which I'm Pasadena Angels for 20 years, and I was president. And we joined Tech Coast, so there's several chapters. We've been holding some panels of lessons learned and just sharing data more and more. So that was one thing that was shared, and it's interesting. I can't say how far the pivot was or how to define it, except almost nobody except Base Pause. And God, she was a good one. She knew what she was doing, and in 4 years, she got us a 12.2x. Everybody else started and is directional. But I think what you're saying is really, I love what you're doing here. And the customer discovery, let them tell you and keep listening and let them help co-create the solution to the problems that they have. So you don't end up with something that they don't want. Let them actually help you create it. And in so doing, you will have a very curvy journey, but it will be a worthy one.
I love that. I've never actually had a data point per pivot. So this is really, really excellent. I do wonder to the extent too, because I feel like you have to pivot. If you don't pivot your company, you know what I mean? I don't mean like a grand pivot, like you're going to go from games to healthcare. But I feel like pivots show your willingness to change your assumptions, is that you're open-minded enough to listen to your customers and build a business that is really addressing their pain points.
Yeah, it's course correction.
For sure.
Thank you for sharing, Faye. I really liked it when you say, I'm so convincing. I felt you, because I'm exactly the same kind of personality. I always find solutions for things, but now I learned, especially the past 3 years since COVID, I play Texas Hold'em too. Like I was like, I never fold hand, or I tend not to fold hand because, you know, sunk cost or whatever, I goes to different reasons. But
Mhm.
sometimes just when you have this baby, when I refer to as baby, doesn't necessarily mean emotionally attached, but your purpose for this baby is to make money for sure, because if you're gonna go with VCs. But the point is that we have to, I don't know, sometimes I struggle with like how do you like the content or the comfortable level that you are able to push you forward while you just give up on some directions that you have to go.
Yeah, I think first, I appreciate the Texas Hold'em reference. I actually live in Vegas. I use a lot of
Oh,
gambling
great.
places.
Yeah, so now I become better afterwards when I try to fold and I need to control certain hands, because those one shot can really kills you. I go all in, or I win a lot, go big or go home. That's my personality lots of time, but I learned to
Yeah.
moderate down, and so especially with startups, because you know you had to be really good
Yeah.
at that.
I think the problem with startups and the reason it's really hard to quit isn't just because of the emotional attachment. I mean, that is a really big part, right? Like shutting down your baby obviously is a big thing to decide. I think the other thing is actually the opportunity cost that you were mentioning, right? So for example, I'm a consultant, right? There's a certain cap that I'll be able to make as an independent consultant. So for me, if that doesn't reach a salary that I could have at a tech company again, or at a VC, of course, I'll go back to doing that, right? So that's one of my personal goals, is making a certain amount in my first year to justify that this is even worth it for me to not go back to work at a tech company or at a VC, right? For startup founders, that is really, really hard because your opportunity cost can be huge. What if you do create the next unicorn? What if you do create the next decacorn? So it's really tough to say, okay, I'll go back to a job that pays me whatever if I could be making billions. Like you'll never be making that much at a job. So I think that's why there's also that big struggle of what you're talking about, is like, I want to be making that money, and that money is the potential is so huge that there's nothing else I could be doing that makes sense. I don't want that to like stop you from being creative though, right? I think a lot of times entrepreneurs are trained to just think VC backed. Like for the majority of my career, I didn't think there was a choice. I thought you were either a small business or you were VC backed. I thought those were the options. So I was like, oh, I don't want a small, I don't want to run like a cafe or something like that. I want to be VC backed. But now there's so many resources that are showing entrepreneurs they can have huge bootstrap businesses. And if you do the math or you just look at the data points, and I feel like I'm a VC, so I shouldn't be saying this, but if you look at the data, the chances of you being a unicorn is, let's say, I'm sure there's actual number out there, but it's like 0.0001%, right? If you bootstrap your company and there's a 2% chance of maybe a 500 million or 50 million exit, the odds are so much more in your favor. And I think in finance, they teach you to just multiply the odds by the outcome. And if bootstrapping makes more sense, then maybe the opportunity cost is really actually in favor of bootstrapping or getting rid of a job instead of doing the entrepreneur. I don't want this to be demotivating. I just realized. I'm just saying.
I don't think it is. Just to take it back to your original slide, I feel like there is a level of motivation that comes from being a very accountable founder who's also incredibly adaptable, right? And it basically means that if you're remaining accountable to your process and your original motivation and vision, at some point, you might learn through that process that VC-backed or venture capital isn't going to be your journey, right? And that moment is where your accountability informs your adaptability. And you have to make a decision. And I think I call these types of founders like cockroach founders, because they survive the nuclear disaster. In fact, in the garage, I want to have a cockroach sash that I give to the cockroach founder from every cohort, because there's always one. And it's because they are so sensitive to how they remain accountable to their process that even when everybody flees the company and it's just them again, right? That they hold, they remain accountable to their original motivation and vision, and they adapt. And a lot of them end up actually becoming bootstrap companies and then become successful because they didn't give up on this idea, and they let the data prove that they were right, versus letting venture capitalists prove that they were right by suggesting that they are worth the money that they're asking for. So I do feel like it is still totally motivating.
Yeah, I love it. That's so well said.
There's not enough literature to support these types of founders, because there's this element of fail. Like, if you're not successfully raising capital, you should feel badly about yourself, or you should question whether or not you're doing it right, which I think is not good.
Yeah, I think, oh, I love this. This is going down another path, but I think it's so fascinating. Like, one of my favorite things is the fact that some of the best tech companies out there have come out of the 2008 recession. And so what that tells me, and I think what that data is telling us, is basically that venture capital funding doesn't dictate the success of the startup. As a matter of fact, what does is, when there is a recession and the venture capitalists aren't investing as much because interest rates are higher, that those companies that are succeeding because they're using real principles and not some superficial valuations to dictate their decision making. Anyways, goes back to the whole motivation thing in terms of like, there's no right or wrong answer on when you should start a company and when you should stop the company. That is all incredibly personal, but I do encourage everybody to take a step back, try to eliminate some of the emotion as much as you can. I know it's impossible to get it all out of the way, and actually sit there and write out not only your motivations, but what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. Because a lot of times we're running to like build these companies and we're doing like the next thing. And a lot of times pivoting too much, right? Is like, we get really like ADHD and we're like, oh my God, this next thing, this next thing, this next thing. But if you actually sit down and say, for the next 2 months, my only goal is doing customer discovery and talking to 200 individuals and understanding their pain points, and then having a solid pain point, then at the end of that 2 months, if you did that, move on to the next step, right? And do it in a process that is methodical and that isn't so erratic, so that you actually like have all of this written down and are able to like come up with really great next steps for yourself and for your business. Now, when to shut down the company, totally personal. I don't know if I can answer that in one sentence, but I'm all about scientific method and writing everything down and printing it out and seeing it every day. I know I went on a tangent there too, but if you guys have any other questions, you can drop them in the chat or you can unmute and ask. I know we only have a few minutes left.
Thank you, Faye, for sharing. It's me again. Just wanted to, are you working with the garage for supporting founders there? Or I can send you LinkedIn or find your information.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yes, let me say that. Add me on LinkedIn for sure. Do I have it right now here? I have my email here. Can you guys still see my screen?
I'll share your LinkedIn in the follow-up. And
Awesome.
it's also in if you click on Faye's name anywhere on the solicitations that I've shared with you guys, that's also her LinkedIn, and you can get to her website from that as well.
Thank you.
And I know Terry just dropped a question, and what's the importance of having a support group to help you get through tough times? I think that's so crucial. I think there's a huge trend recently in like communities and people joining communities, because we're just very lonely and isolated as people in general, let alone entrepreneurs. And so you see a lot of these things coming up where people are looking for support in different ways. And so I think it's really important to have not just a community to help you get through stuff, but also people to hold you accountable. So like that weekly check-in that I was saying, hold yourself accountable. I do that for myself and my business, but every other week I actually meet with another independent consultant and we hold each other accountable. So we make sure that there's somebody there that like has our backs. A few other questions. How could VC provide more emotional support for founders in addition to funding? That's so funny. Lucas, I love that question. So when I was head of operations at Forum Ventures, people were like, what do you do? I was like, mostly I'm a shoulder to cry on. And it's because I started January 2020. And so March 2020 hit and everybody thought they had to like let go of their staff, and everybody that they convinced to join and leave their cushy jobs to come on this adventure because they got funding. And so I do think like, I think every VC should be a shoulder to cry on. I think every VC should like provide community and support in that way. Now, do they all do that? I don't necessarily think so, but also if you guys are looking for VC funding, there's a lot of resources out there where people are rating VCs. So I think VC Guide is one of them. There's a few other ones. I'm forgetting the names right now, but I'm sure if you Google like VC review or VC like feedback, people are actually rating them. And now VCs are finally being held accountable for how they treat founders, right? Because a lot of VCs give financial support and they claim to give other stuff, and then they don't give you anything when you join. And so I think it's important that founders, if you guys get funding or if you guys have a bad experience with a VC, I encourage you guys to actually rate them, because I think we need to hold people accountable to what they say they're going to do. And every VC says they're founder friendly, and then they ghost founders and do all these horrible things, give predatory terms. Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah. So for everybody else, definitely reach out on LinkedIn. My name is right there. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to send me a LinkedIn message. You can also send me an email. I'm always happy to help founders. I try to give back as much as I can. Selena, I was going to say, I don't necessarily work with the garage in terms of like regular mentorship, but I try to do a lot of talks and I try to give back as much as I can. So if you guys need anything, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Arcelia. Thank you for coming to the talk. I hope it was helpful. I know motivation is like a very personal topic, so I hope it didn't offend anyone, and I hope you guys got something out of it.
No, I think this was it was such a practical talk. Faye, you broke it down. I think that you've given food for thought to all of the founders, which is so important. I think, my main takeaway is make sure you guys are checking in with yourselves. Sometimes you can get really busy putting one foot in front of the other, and you got all these things to do, and you have a lot of people relying on you and depending on you to do these things. And you're relying on yourself as well. Spending that time, like I loved when you were like, be your own manager. Be your own manager.
Mm-hmm.
Be your own supervisor. If you were supervising yourself, what questions would you have for yourself, right? Are you checking in? Are you effectively checking in? And really knowing what motivates you intrinsically and extrinsically, and having those lists to break it down. Put it like you showed the sticky notes, put them up. There's nothing stopping us from reminding ourselves routinely why we do the things that we do, and just assuming that when the going gets tough, we're gonna do that, I think is, it's not actually how it's going to happen. So the best thing you can do is set yourself up for success, so that when the going gets tough, you are already prepared to support yourself. So, I mean, I'm so happy that you've come back. I know I'm going to get you back again. And anyone who would like to connect with Faye, please reach out to me, or you can do a LinkedIn connect. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys next week for next week's chat. I'm not 100% sure it's going to happen, but look out for my follow-up email with the details of that. Faye, you're amazing. One day
really quick.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to ask, if you do add me on LinkedIn, can you just say that this is how we know each other? Sometimes people leave out the message and then I don't know like that you guys were here. So just make sure to include that. And the last tip is about being your own manager. Also recognize when you're burnt out and recognize when you need time, right? Like I said, if you need to like go get a drink on Friday, or if you need to take some time off, do it. Be your own manager and like recognize your own needs.
Yeah. And sometimes that means really understanding your boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And so, no, thank you. You're the best. Hopefully we'll be together again next week. If not, our Q2 Oceanside chat series will be scheduled pretty soon, and we're going to have a lot of great chats in the coming quarter. So looking forward to seeing all of these faces, familiar and otherwise. And also, VSG, we have Summer Smasher coming up for students. Our spring cohort application is live. If you guys have any questions about those things, please reach out to me. Bye, everyone. Enjoy.
Thank you, RC. Thank you,
Thank
Faye.
you,
It was
RC.
great. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. Well said.